A drop in the immense sea of the divine will. Continued. Don't expect yourself to be perfect when you first start living in the divine will. It will take some time for the divine will to fill you completely with God's life. This is because you have been using your own human will for some time, and it would be very difficult to stop using your will with the snap of your fingers. Of course, God could do it instantly, but this is not His way. He wants us to grow slowly in this gift, so that we are not overwhelmed, and so that we appreciate the gift He's giving us out of His love. God knows that every one of us will make mistakes again and again, especially in the beginning. If you do something that you know is not in God's will, like fight with your friend or disobey your parents, don't be discouraged. Tell God you are sorry and go to confession, if it is a serious sin. Then just ask God for the gift again. He will be very happy to give it to you again and again, and again and again. Just trust Him and keep asking for the gift. Don't waste a moment operating in your own human will. Now that you are living in the divine will, God will start to work on you. That was Jesus' promise to Luisa. Slowly but surely, God will purify you. Since you are living in His divine will, He will take out of you the sins and bad habits that don't belong in you. As He does this, He will start filling you up with His qualities. So out with the bad, in with the good. As an example, instead of you developing a 10-step program to get rid of pride, you need only stay in the divine will, and God will do the work with you. Soon you will find yourself sinning less and less. God is bringing you to holiness. At the same time the work of purification is being done, God will do other things to prepare you for heaven. He will take worldly attitudes out of you. He will heal you from hurts from the past that still bother you. He will explain the things of heaven to you and take away the lies the world and Satan tell you. Sometimes these lessons can be difficult, but they are worth the trouble because you are getting ready for heaven. Let's face it, no one in heaven believes money and things are important to be happy. You are now living in the divine will. Except for an occasional fall back into human will, you are living the same life that Adam and Eve lived before they disobeyed God. Even though you may not feel any different, you have taken your first steps into heaven on earth. Jesus once said to Luisa, "Don't worry about being unable to do it, because I myself will teach you, a little act at a time, how to do it." If you really want this gift, there is no way you can fail with Jesus as your teacher. As time goes on and the divine will grows in you, you will experience more and more. Maybe even the miraculous. Near the end of her life, Luisa was able to raise her confessor from the dead because she didn't want to start all over with a new confessor. Maybe the birds will start landing on your shoulders like they did with St. Francis. But don't look for the miraculous. Your day-to-day acts in the divine will are more important. This is because these are now divine acts, and Jesus Himself has done them because you used God's will. Luisa had a hard time believing that her simple little acts were divine. Jesus explained that everything God does is divine. Even though an act may be little, it is still divine if it is done in the divine will. God made the heavens, but He also made the tiny seed. Your day in the divine will may seem very ordinary, but it is really extraordinary. When you first start living in the divine will, it may be helpful to call upon the divine will many times during the day to do in whatever you're doing or about to do. This will be a reminder that the divine will is animating you in all your activities. You wash your face, you eat your lunch, you say your prayers, you do your schoolwork, all divine acts. As you grow in this gift, you will not have to remind yourself about the divine will because you will constantly be aware of the gift throughout the day. The divine will is filling you with its life. Eventually you may not only be aware of, but be able to feel the divine will operating in you. Luisa reached a point in this divine life where she could actually feel Jesus lifting her arm. In the little house in Nazareth, the Blessed Mother Mary's simple acts as she took care of Saint Joseph and Jesus were all divine acts. Now your home will become the little house of Nazareth as you start living divine life as a gift from God, performing countless divine acts with every breath you take. A divine act is infinite. When a divine act is done on earth, it is like an explosion that radiates infinitely. All creation feels this explosion, and God is very pleased. These infinite divine acts spread out over all the people on earth, and God the Father sees our world more favorably. It was Mary's many acts in her life and the divine will that convinced God that the time was right to send his Son as a Messiah. It will be our many acts in the divine will that will prompt God to allow his kingdom to come on earth and to fulfill the Our Father. Before the gift of living in the divine will was returned to us through Luisa, the saints could only do good and only human acts of love for God. These were not infinite and did not radiate over all creation, covering the fallen world. So you can see how important it is to stay in the divine will and not waste time on acts in the human will. Just as with the coming of the Messiah, the Father knows exactly how many acts he wants done before he allows his kingdom to come. When you do an act in the divine will, the angels carry that act to the throne of the Father. The Father is infinitely pleased with this act, and he sends a wave out over all creation. The blessed in heaven and the angels receive a greater glory, the souls in purgatory receive a wave of relief, and all of creation receives a blessing. Since all acts in the divine will are divine, one act cannot be more divine than another. Yet God will respond differently to acts done in the divine will. The act of cleaning your room in the divine will cause the Father to send out a wave of glory and grace. Whereas receiving Holy Communion in the divine will pours out a sacramental grace on all souls. It is amazing to think that if you go to communion today in the divine will, even the worst criminals are given a sacramental grace that they never asked for or knew they were getting. They may just wake up feeling a little less rotten and not understand why. However, it is up to each individual to respond to the grace that is poured out upon them. Many will not respond at first because they are caught in their lives of sin. But if they are continually bombarded with the wave of unmerited graces caused by many acts done by those living in the divine will, eventually some will respond. You can see how this wave of grace caused by acts done in the divine will can change the world. The prophets in the Bible have foretold a great era of peace that the world will experience for 1,000 years. The gift of the divine plan is God's plan to usher it in. Not only will the divine will purify us, but the gift will purify the world at the same time and bring about the completion of God's kingdom on earth. In addition to your acts done in the divine will, prayers in the divine will help usher in God's kingdom. Like your acts, these prayers become divine as if Jesus himself prayed them. Rounds are prayers in the divine will. The purpose of praying the rounds, as to say, is to give God the glory which is due to him. In order to understand the rounds, you need to know that when God created each person, he created a vast number of acts for that person to do in the divine will. These acts exist in eternity, even if the person chooses not to do them. So every person has a body and a soul, but also acts, waiting for him or her to possess. When the gift of the divine will was lost, man could only take possession of these created acts with the human will. This was not God's original plan. This did not give God the glory. So with the use of the divine will, we have to go back in our rounds and take possession of all those acts done by other people for the last 6,000 years, then give them to the Father for His glory as the divine gifts He should have received. This is no small job. Except for Jesus, Mary, Luisa, and the sons and daughters of the divine will, that's you. All acts since the fall in the garden were done with the human will. Even a good act done by a saint in the human will doesn't give God the glory He's due. Also, there are acts which never be done because the people who are supposed to take possession of them chose to do bad acts instead. These undone acts still exist and are suspended in time. We have to take possession of all of these too and bring them into the divine will to give to the Father. With these rounds, we are working to give God the divine gifts He missed out on for the last 6,000 years. You can do these rounds on your own. If you are at Mass, you can take possession of all the acts of the people mentioned in that reading. If it is a saint's feast, you can take possession of all the acts of that saint. If you are mowing the lawn with the divine will, you can take possession of all the acts of people who ever worked at their home. Bring everything into the divine will. Never pray for yourself. You are in the divine will and God will take care of you and all of your concerns. Always pray for all souls, past, present, and future. This is the greatest thing you can do to help others. A good way to go back throughout history and do rounds is to use one of the books containing Luisa's rounds of creation. Not only does she go through the 7 days of creation, but she recounts the events in the Garden of Eden, the Old Testament, Jesus and Mary's lives, and the Church. If you read these, you are doing the rounds with Luisa. Of course, all of these acts done by Jesus, Mary, Adam and Eve, before Adam and Eve have sinned, were done in the divine will. But we can repeat their acts with the use of the divine will, make them our own, and give them to the Father again for His glory. God will be very pleased to receive these acts again and again. He will respond with wave after wave of grace. You can also take possession of God's very own act of creation and give it back to Him for His greater glory. There is another kind of round that helps all creatures give God glory. It was God's plan that Adam and Eve and their offspring were to act as the priests for all creation. With our voice, the birds, animals, rocks, water, stars, and all creatures were to glorify the Father. But with the loss of the divine will, man was no longer able to act as priest. He was the only creature no longer living in the divine will. So how could he be the priest for all creation? Now, with the return of the gift, we can take our position as priests. In these rounds, we put our voice into the birds, water, and trees, and have them give love, praise, and glory to the Father. Except for man, the rest of creation does not have a voice to do this on its own. At the most, creatures display their beauty, strength, immensity, splendor, as they reflect the qualities of God and give Him glory this way. All creation, from the greatest star to the smallest seed, has been waiting 6,000 years for the sons and daughters of the divine will to help them fully glorify the Father. How would a bird glorify God if it had a voice? We don't know for sure, but we can imagine. God, thanks for the air that lifts my wings. This tree you made would be a great place to build my nest. Thank you for the sweet rain to soften the earth so I can find juicy worms. I'm going to fly high over your beautiful world. I love you, Father. Now, as a priest, we can put our voice into the bird so it can finally tell God, I love you. We can do this for all creation. A very helpful round to pray is when you see or hear about someone who is suffering. Maybe you know your neighbor is sick. Maybe the TV news reported some American soldiers were killed in action. There is so much suffering in the world, and it is wasted. Any suffering joined with the cross of Jesus has redemptive power. But no one takes the time to offer the suffering to the Father. The next time you see or hear of someone suffering, make a round out of it and pray. I take this boy's suffering from the bully at school. I join it with Jesus' cross. I give it to you, Father, for your glory and for the reparation of sins of all souls, past, present, and future. May your kingdom come. You may wonder how you can make your prayers multiply in everyone and in all creation. How can you take Jesus and Mary's acts and make them your own? How can you put your voice in creation? How can you take possession of acts done in the past, present, and future? How can you offer other people's suffering to God? Remember, the divine will is the essence of God, and now you share His divine life. Since God is everywhere, so are you. Jesus compared a soul living in the divine will to a drop of water dispersed in the immense sea of God's will. It may seem that you are only in your home or at school, but you are in all creation, past, present, and future. You are in the trees, stars, other people, souls in purgatory. This is how you can put your voice in all creation, take possession of acts, multiply acts to the infinite. Does this seem impossible to you? Nothing is impossible for God. Lesson on praying the so-called rounds. Since everything is part of creation, the rounds that you can do are endless. You can make a round very general. For example, like this. I take possession of all the acts of all people, and I offer them to you, Father, with my love for your glory and on behalf of all souls, past, present, and future. May your kingdom come. Or you can also make a round very specific. I put my voice in all the raindrops, and I have them shout, I love you for your glory, Father, and on behalf of all souls, past, present, and future. May your kingdom come. Don't worry about your words. The Holy Spirit will guide you. The important thing is that you start to give the Father everything He should have received from man over the last 6,000 years, while man was on his detour. If you think doing a round seems too complicated, it may help to break it down into its parts. This is what you do in a round. First, take possession of or put your voice in some part of creation. For example, the birds, the flowers, the moment God created all the stars, all of Jesus' miracles, or the acts of the saints, the voices of all children. It can be anything. Second, put your I love you in it. Third, give it to the Father for His glory. Fourth, give it on behalf of all souls, past, present, and future. And fifth, ask for the kingdom to come. This is the reason why we live in the divine will. We need to get off the 6,000-year detour and back on the original path God planned for us. If we give God the glory He deserves from everyone, He will allow the kingdom to come. Do you have to use all these words to make your prayer a real round? Of course, the answer is no. You may want to use some of these words in the beginning so that you understand the powerful work you are doing. But after a while you will develop your own rounds. Let's do some simple rounds while you are the first baseman in the middle of the final game of the season. Try this. You are waiting for the first batter to step to the plate. Picture Jesus and you pushing a huge pile of baseball players toward the throne of God. You decide you might as well throw in all the acts of hockey, football, soccer, basketball players into your imaginary pile. Now you have done a round before the batter takes his first swing. You can pray and first take possession of all the acts of kids who play sports. Second, put your I love you on it. Jesus did everything for love of the Father, so when you do anything with Jesus, you are doing it for the love of the Father. And third, give it to the Father for His glory. You and Jesus are pushing the pile towards the throne of God. And 4, give on behalf of all the souls, past, present, and future. Jesus never thought of himself, but did everything for all of us. And 5th, ask for the kingdom to come. You know that you are not pushing these piles with Jesus in the middle of a ball game for the fun of it. You are doing the work of the divine will to help usher in the kingdom with Jesus. There is plenty of time for more rounds at first base. In between batters and while they are warming up the new pitcher, you and Jesus push a pile of trees towards the throne. The neighborhood dog prompts you to push a pile of animals. The fly buzzing you gives you the idea of making a huge pile of insects on the Father. The batter gets hit by the pitch. You offer up this suffering and a huge pile of injuries and sicknesses to the Father. A friend of yours makes it to first and you exchange a few words. Jesus and you make a huge pile of kind words to give to the Father. As you walk back to the dugout after the third out, you wonder what Jesus played when he was a kid. You make a huge pile of everything Jesus did as a baby or as a boy, and you push it with him towards the throne of the Father. There you go, rounds on first base. If you can do rounds in the middle of a ball game, you can do them anywhere. Just do everything with Jesus. As you grow in the divine will, the Holy Spirit may guide you in your own round so that you can add these rounds to your day full of acts in the divine will. When rounds become second nature for you, like turning on the light when you walk into a dark room, you are well on your way to living the divine life. Read and find out as much as you can about the divine will. When you are learning about the divine will, you are learning about the very essence of God. The divine will is the one will shared in common with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It is the unity of these three persons. The more we learn about the divine will, the more we will also share in God's divinity. It is His great gift to us, His greatest gift to us. There are many movements, spiritual devotions, religious orders and groups within the Catholic Church. The Marian movement of priests brings us closer to God through His Mother. The charismatic movement allows us to experience the presence of God in the atmosphere of heaven. These are all rungs in the ladder to grow closer to God. But the gift of the divine will is the loft at the top of the ladder. It is God's very own will given to you in exchange for your human will. There is no higher place to go. All you have to do is to explore the loft. At this point you may only have a small light to look around. You can't see into the far corners of the loft. But the more you learn about the divine will, the bigger and brighter light God will give you. Everything you need to make God happy is in the loft. And if you're in the loft, you will be happy too. Work hard for a bright light by reading and doing many rounds, and God will share the secrets of the divine will with you as He shared them with Luisa.